Although I never really met Michael, but I've been listening a great deal to his performing language trio, Flum, and certainly have one of his poetry collection at home since it came out in 2005, I think, The External Combustible Engine. So it's nice to meet Michael if you care to stand up and come up here. Oh, here you are. Come up, Michael. The rendition of the Beatles are great.
Okay. I have my partner, Mary Caponegro, is going to assist me in performing this odd text. I just wanted to relate an old memory of reading Robert for one of the first times. It must have been 25, 30 years ago. I had dropped out of music conservatory and was cleaning apartments for an industrial furniture rental firm, and had discovered in a wonderful independent bookstore the Book of Persephone with that cover. And maybe you don't remember the cover, but I was sitting on an unmade bed in an apartment, not cleaning and reading this book with utter rapt attention when my boss, who was a woman younger than I, came in and saw the cover and said, "What are you reading?" And I said, "You would not understand," or something to that effect. So, and now Robert is, in fact, quite literally my boss. So, who could ever have imagined? So, what I'm going to read here, without a nice cover, is an abstract of a kind of massive set of pages I composed about 9 years ago, about the use of the word between in his poetry, and hiatus and gap generally, because I thought an investigation of the use of this word might prove to be comprehensive, a convenient way of domesticating this massive, ever-pullulating oeuvre, which I stopped trying to think about as the production of a single man and began to envision as a kind of magnificent machine, which I refer to as the RK. So I'm going to read this. It's kind of a set of notes derived from this massive text, which had a very complex and elaborate critical apparatus, some of which I've included in here, but most of which had to be suppressed in the interest of time. I'm going to read my language and a couple of quotations. Mary is going to read the illustrative lines from Robert's poetry, and so it'll be kind of a performance, a little antiphonal event. The citations are drawn from the very beginning, Armed Descent, through to Time of Voice, though I think the ideas in here are applicable to the later and even more magisterial books. Mary, when she says "or," is separating one citation or illustrative line from another, because sometimes she uses two. Okay, why don't you get in here? Right.
Do you want me to do it without the mic?
No. We'll just shuttle back and forth, right? So this is going to take some practice. A performative abstract of east of the sun, west of the RK. An RK of texts is situated between a person, Robert Kelly, and a hypothetical reader.
RK, after the Greek arche, beginning, first cause, origin, also derivatively supreme power, dominion, empire.
Between the way things are and an imagined way, a textual RK has been inserted.
We are silenced by the way things are, or language is revenge against the natural condition of which we are the lovely victims.
An archive of acknowledgments, of permissions and intimacies of every variety occupies, in the form of an RK, the gap between. This arcade of poems, perspectives, lures, colors, temperatures, colonizes, fills in, and metabolizes an hiatus between.
Archive is derived from arche, a public record, from the Latin archivum, likewise derived from the Greek archeon, a public building, residence of the magistrates.
An arcade that detects, approaches, mills species of between, whether a distance between two people, the space between silence and language, interval of time between now and then, vacant spaces between the words of other texts, between meaning and void. An abhorrence of vacuums, this arcade, mill of betweens, spinning into a legible flesh or dream or book, the distance between. It would invade the emptiness of, pour through, and fill the inanity of heritable presumption. Its center ubiquitous, its circumference perpetually falling away into this morning's poem, this afternoon's story, this evening's play.
Plexuses of a neurology whose central brain is everywhere, nowhere, or the center suspended everywhere where I can build my house at the junction of itself with itself.
This arcade, this textual intimacy, this drawing near to a reader, to the words themselves, to the drawing near itself.
When I get down to it, there has been little I could really believe in but the heat of the process.
A narrowing of distances.
And the business of the magic life is to map the outer world inside, to map the inner world out there until you are master of the distances.
This languaged habitation of assumed betweens, verbal encroachment onto any presumed vacancy, this arcade, a shifting center of acknowledgement, heat exchange of syllables, systematic lust for meaning.
Am I godlike because I love exactly? There is no lust like the lust for meaning.
How to understand such a lust, but that words, text, aspire to a haptic presence for the arcade. The moribund epistemology of philosophy departments attains to the immediacy of touch in and around the arcade.
Touch things, touch them kindly, not gently. Touch them till they're touched and you can tell. I have been trying to touch you all my life, and all you ever are is my life.
Herewith an inventory of betweendom as it figures in the arcade. Between can mean variously. 1. The prelude to cosmogony.
Now the Greeks called the first condition chaos, or the yawn. The Northerners said gap, or yawning gap, and this gap is what is always mind, the land between.
2. A social perineal space through which we arrive at the intermediary stage between birth and death.
Born alone, between and between we die in like manner.
3. A constant hum of summons between an unlettered nub of self and its signifying reflection across the way. Where is this way?
There is a tearing, always a tearing of our hearts into the geography of projection, and what is most close to us must always be found there.
4. A fertile gap, a generative nullity, space across which the spark of invention leaps, can leap.
Inside the story, the spark gleams, groans, leaps out in passages of apparently irrelevant description, fastens on things, weapons, colors, a look recorded in some eye, a silence, or the gap between one thought and the next. Mind is this gap.
5. The weather, particularly a wet weather or atmospheric intimacy.
I am of those heretics glad in rain, love fog, wind, all business of the lower air, whose caresses keep the mind sphere turbulent, or there is a sphinx of air in the middle of the air.
6. The necessary silences within an articulated order, a conditioned emptiness, the silent answer that solicits its enunciated question.
And that is what poetry could only be, only the gap, the silence at the end of every line.
7. An interposition as of clothing.
One takes off clothes, takes, and there is only clothes.
Nota bene, one could write an entire article on the figure of the garment in the arcade as a kind of transcendental aesthetic, clothes as a Kantian time and space. Nature loves to hide, indeed, but it wants as badly to be discovered, understood, named. Roland Barthes might as well have been providing a gloss on this feature of the arcade when he wrote in The Pleasure of the Text. Is not the most erotic portion of a body where the garment gapes? In perversion, which is the realm of textual pleasure, there are no erogenous zones, a foolish expression besides. It is intermittence, as psychoanalysis has so rightly stated, which is erotic. The intermittence of skin flashing between two articles of clothing, trousers and sweater, between two edges, the open-necked shirt, the glove and the sleeve. It is this flash itself which seduces, or rather, the staging of an appearance as disappearance.
I love your vocabulary, he said to her. I love what clothes your mind. Or, you are a glove. Or, the mind is its occasions, faithful to the cloth and to the swell of hip that minds the cloth.
8. The shared zone of lovers.
A rill is something lovers ought to share, a current jostle between two banks, or, and wake up every morning to that private paradise of skin and sense and deep between.
9. The discursive space between two persons, that is, the activated space of talk.
There is no mind except keep talking, or if I don't talk about them, they're not real, or to find a place to talk to you or find a talk to place you in.
10. The temporal equivalence of item 10, namely the fullness of time threshed down to an essential and eternal now from which time issues.
I want now to turn into then in such a subtle way it feels like now all the time. Or, I mean, an art shot through with recency, with quick new understandings of the world, spoken hard. Or, and now is never now enough for me.
And this seminal now, in the verbally constituted RK, just that spermatic word of Stoic origin, a generative principle that entifies, brings into being through speech, not merely a world as we know it, but the world as we love it. 11. The space between the beginning and end of the poem, meaning its form. The insinuative impulse of the RK to work its way into every conceivable between necessitates an altogether more accommodating and catholic regard for poetic form. Its ceaseless effort, the RK never sleeps, serves as an example of the posture or stance, the attitude, in the sense of a considered disposition of maximal receptivity, necessary to capture the scattered evidence of a hidden harmony, recondita armonia, and respond in kind. Such attention will always offer witness to the prodigality of nature through a prodigality of formal response. Taken to its logical limit, of course, such responsiveness would demand that form be always and everywhere specific to its occasion, though often in the RK one finds a straining against form, the intimation that there is more to say than time will or can allow, this reflected in a propensity to enjam.
Whose chains themselves are beautiful, the constraints of order crystallize in wind as wind rain in the same rain, it is the face.
One reads in the Book of Persephone, section 6, each line of which, though grouped in stanzas of 3, rushes headlong into its successor, as if to demonstrate exactly how heedless to such constraints as 3-line stanzas a poetry faithful to the immediate must be. And even the chains themselves are borne off by more and yet more systems of enjambment. The polysyntaxis of the emptying and sentence move even further toward this formal mimesis of a dynamic plenitude. The crush of objects and sensations, the collision and interpenetration of incident and observation, of private and public spheres, you and I, all serve to awaken the reader to her essentially enjambed condition. In syntactical terms, a paratactic condition. One might indeed characterize the work the RK exerts on the between as a radical parataxis. A parataxis of authority that would collapse social hierarchical distinctions among persons.
Don't let them give you language. Language must be taken. Or only stand. You'll be authority enough.
A structural parataxis that would collapse hierarchical distinctions with regard to literary form.
We dance oblique the jut of our serenity into the unfailing measures of her chance, till our drift becomes the only certainty.
A temporal parataxis that would collapse hierarchical distinctions among occasions.
Wherever you are, there is understanding, or all seems determined to be now.
A parataxis of content that would collapse hierarchical distinctions between the noteworthy and the quotidian.
The thing has no meaning but what you put in, invention. To make it is to find it there. Or every sentence is the whole of what he ever knows. Or, section 20 of Mont Blanc. or pasim, the entire RK.
The purpose of these levelings, not to simplify the world, but by removing unnecessary or factitious obstacles to preserve the forward momentum of an original permission to see, feel, think, appreciate, speak beyond the dimensions of the given, that paltry bequest of half-seen, half-felt, half-appreciated preferences and notions. Language in the RK means to perform these renovations of body and spirit. Language in the RK means to approximate a Johannine logos, reality and its articulation thoroughly interfused, a logos as equivalent to ratio as well as oratio, to quote Richard Onions, nutriment and solvent in one. Its force can be felt even at the intra-lexical level.
Orchestral interlude upon the violins, clangor of brass lamps, shedding light and thunder of symphony, ardors and sasses and thorns, then soft, quiet fluids, mesembering the rain.
This archaic logos, working its way even through previous logoi, established texts, Shelley's Mont Blanc, for instance, or individual words, or even Slavic word roots, as in the Russian tales, makes no secret of its intention to verbalize thoroughly any surface with which it comes into contact. It is unapologetically invasive and bent on enlarging and deepening its reach, a campaign of like passing through like, an anabasis of language returning home through itself. To return to our inventory of betweens, 12, the chiasmatic space between the divine and the human. Think of the 60-second fragment of Heraclitus, and I quote, "Immortals are mortal, mortals immortal, living the other's death, dead in the other's life."
The impenetrable appetite to be what they are not, to be what the other is.
It is the pietistic distinction between sacred and profane realms, the gap between these orders, that the RK will instinctively endeavor to fill with its precious kudzu of parole, with the effect of simultaneously secularizing the divine while divining, meaning and godding the motives of a full-blooded secular.
The gods broken into the pieces that are us, or God me, or be the God.
A Greek word, perikoresis. John of Damascus chose the word to describe that reciprocal inherence of divine and human natures in the person of Christ. It derives from perikorein, to go around, rotate, to come in succession. The equivalent Latin phrase, communicatio idiomatum, a communication of idioms, is more illustrative, perhaps.
Not till the nature of the God-man is decided does the evening news make sense.
How better than by this rotary interpenetration of God and man to capture the essential work of a mill of between? Were it cogent to speak at all of a stable center in the RK, it would be in terms of just such a turbine of renewal, a mill for the ecstatic and perpetual intermixing of things, meanings, relationships, values, gods, animals.
On the other side of because, there ground a mill, or let me pass through you and change my mind.
To quote William James, not only the absolute in its own other, but the simplest bits of immediate experience are their own others, if that Hegelian phrase be once for all allowed. The concrete pulses of experience appear pent in by no such definite limits as our conceptual substitutes for them are confined by. They run into one another continuously and seem to interpenetrate. What in them is relation and what is matter is hard to discern.
We are mapped as each other. We are maps of each other.
And the RK, an art of discursive Christic cartography, its inks drawn from the fluxional verve of the world from which it has arisen and into which it disappears, turn and turn about, day after day, through insurrections and transfigurations of syntax, that faculty of the soul.
For syntax frees and meaning is ownership, and this art is for those with nothing to say, and trust only them, incandescent unowners of a transpiring text, this house of prayer for all people.
Not Christ himself, but the activity of which he is but one particular embodiment, a mitochondrial Christic, whose work, this heat of exchanges, in its essential rhythmicity is a musical insistence.
The diet of self, consuming himself and stone, both of which we shall call Jesus, perches outside of time, maybe not of rhythm.
That choreographs the movement toward of our intentional consciousness.
My darling's consciousness never dies. It always goes somewhere else, and this else is our business. Darlings, our business is always this other reaching.
And comes to an end only with a closing of all distances, with an intimacy unto interpenetration of all opposing terms, with an end of time itself.
I want now to turn into then in such a subtle way it feels like now all the time.
13. Between, finally, as the primeval space of all potentiality, the nursemaid of being itself.
Credo in unum Deum matrem omnipotentem creatricem, of all things sensible and unconscious, maker of heaven and heaven in earth.
I'm speaking here of the hypodoche, or receptacle of material being in Plato's Timaeus. Not the idea, nor its imperfect material facsimile, but a third kind, a third thing, comparatively neutral, neither a thing nor an idea, but something other that allows for, that permits. Permissions are as numerous as betweens in the vastness of the arche. The matrix in which material impressions come into being and pass away. It could be that all of the other predications of the between, if mixed thoroughly together, amount to this primal generosity, this first and last permission, queen of between, so aptly captured in that old chestnut from Under Words entitled Looking, which we will, in closing, read.
Once when I read the funnies, I took my little magnifying glass and looked too close.
Forms became colors, and colors were just arrays of dots, and between the dots I saw the rough, bleak, storyless legend of the pulp paper, empty as the winter moon, and I dreaded it.
I had looked right through when I wanted a universe that sustains looker and looking and the unseen forever, detail after detail, never ending, and all I had found was between.
But between had its own song. Find it in the space between. It is just as empty as it seems, but this blankness is your mother. Thanks.